But you do have to be careful with post savers. The fencing company who supplied me with that fence 4 years ago installed these in the wrong place. And one of them, I realised today to my horror, wasn't properly heat sealed to the post. So it's been accelerating the rotting process by creating a water trap between the post and the sleeve.
So you do want to make sure you install them correctly. Today's video is brought to you by our good friends over at Nationwide Industries, the Fence Pros' #1 choice. And they are this Fence Pros' #1 choice for a couple reasons. One, we love using their Keystone Traverse latches. They're easy to install. You simply bolt them onto the post. No drilling for rods or cutting the rods required. It's a pretty straightforward installation process. We also love using their full line of galvanized hardware. It shows up quickly and reliably. All right, guys, today's video is titled How to DIY Repair Your Garden Fence. We've done a lot of review videos on repairing fences lately because there's a ton of videos out there. It's a hot topic that a lot of people like to talk about. The channel name, I'm probably gonna need some help with it. So Charlie DIY, I'm all in on, but Charlie DIY TE, or is it DIY White? This has the whole miter tin thing written all over it. I'm probably butchering the name of this channel. I'm sure it's completely obvious to someone somewhere else. How would you pronounce this channel? Let me know in the comments below.
So I'm going to try and work out today how best to fix something that I know ultimately needs completely replacing. This fence was put in about 2010 by a friend of my father-in-law's. Really kind of him to do it at the time, but wasn't done how I would have done it, and it's rotted.
Yeah, #1 reason for wood fence replacement is rot at the post. I mean, exactly like what you're seeing here, right at ground level in that aerobic zone of the soil, where all the microbes like to live. They're actually attacking the nutrients in the post and thus causing rot and then post failure.
We're going to try and fix this today in as cost-effective a way as possible, given that in a few years' time we're going to have to rip it out and start again. Got a really chaotic mixture of fences here. Panel fences dating back to the 1970s and this more recent repair, through to the traditional close-board Everest rail fence that I installed 4 years ago. You might have seen the video on that.
So this is interesting. For us here in the States, I don't know that I've seen a fence like this here, in that it looks like the posts are actually, they've got, you know, a half diamond removed from the post. The rails look like they're square, but turned, well, they'd have to be half square, right? So they have to be triangles, I guess, installed onto the post with a flat side towards the picket. Becomes part of the structural component of the post, I suppose. Interesting for sure. I've not seen this here in the States, but Everest rail is a type of fence I've heard about and seen maybe 1 or 2 videos on YouTube. More UK, European, that sort of thing.
There are a couple of problems with this fence. Firstly, it doesn't have gravel boards running along the bottom.
Again, that's common here in our part of the United States, where you don't typically see any sort of what they'll call a gravel board, what we would call a kickboard or a rot board. Now, in the southern United States, Texas specifically, you see a ton of rot board or kickboard, gravel board installed at the bottom. It's usually a treated piece of wood. It's like a sacrificial layer that the pickets then sit above and on top of to prevent rotting.
But the main issue we've got here is that these posts have snapped off at ground level, this being where it rots. It actually rots below ground as well, and I know that because when I dug the holes for the new fence posts, I couldn't find much of the old posts left behind in the ground. So this is clearly the weak point of a fence like this, which, don't forget, is now 13 years old. Some people would say that's had a good lifespan. Now, concrete fence posts or wooden fence posts supported by a concrete spur are admittedly a lot stronger.
If you watch our channel at all, you know we really like following D&J projects there in the UK that make their own concrete posts incredibly strong. If it weren't for the weight of these things, I would be even more of a supporter of them. But talk about strong. There
are things you can do to protect these fence posts to make them last a hell of a lot longer than they would have done otherwise. You can use these post savers as I did with the Everest rail.
Yeah, so the post saver product is exactly what I was going to talk about. It is the product to use in this example. So it's a outer layer that's got bitumen in the middle. You heat it up and it adheres to the post. Basically seals it against rot and decay. And they're also warranted against rot, which is nice.
And I went to the added step of treating the post below ground with this Bostik bituminous paint to prolong the life of the post as long as possible. But you do have to be careful with post savers. The fencing company who supplied me with that fence 4 years ago installed these in the wrong place. And one of them, I realised today to my horror, wasn't properly heat sealed to the post. So it's been accelerating the rotting process by creating a water trap between the post and the sleeve.
So you do want to make sure you install them correctly. You want to make sure you heat them up, typically with a torch that will liquefy the bitumen that then does seal it all together. Also, to his point, these were installed quite a bit high on the post, so it literally gives you a line of the darker area is supposed to be below grade, the lighter area is supposed to be above grade. So it looks like either these weren't installed correctly on the post, or maybe the post wasn't installed to depth when it was installed, but overall user error on this product, I think.
So having found a couple of old fence posts in the garage for the repair, I decided a much safer strategy in this case would be to use that Bostik paint rather than some sort of newfangled heat shrunk sleeve.
I don't know that it's newfangled. I think they've been around for several decades, but with the paint, I don't know that there's a lot of proven data behind the paint either. I don't know. I think you might be trading one problem for another.
The other thing I love is this brilliant old-fashioned digging tool, because particularly for stone-free ground, it cuts lovely round holes, perfect for the post.
That's interesting. I wonder how that thing works. I wonder if it's got maybe an auger, maybe it's a manual auger, a handheld auger possibly.
Much better at excavating soil than a trowel.
Huh. No, not a hand auger. How do these things work? If you guys use these, what are we looking at here?
Setting each post in concrete is blindingly simple and very satisfying. I use fast setting mixers like this as I don't want to wait overnight for the post to set solid. You could drive stakes into the ground to screw each post to get it sitting perfectly true, but these days I simply lean a spade up against the post to get it roughly in the right position, pour water a third of the depth of the hole, and then fill with the cement mix.
We are absolutely not going to get into the argument of pre-mix versus post-mix concrete or anything. So in Quickset, these are similar instructions to what you would find on the bag, where you'd place water in the hole and then dump the quick setting concrete into the water-filled hole, or not water-filled, but hole with water already in it, and then light mixing, that sort of thing.
The instructions say tap the surface, but I think it's better to get a stick and drive it right down to the base of the hole.
Yeah, there's no downside to it.
The next step was to secure new fence rails into position. The existing rails were too short, so I bought 3 new 4x2 tannalized sections from a local timber yard. And after treating the cut ends with the bitumen paint, I screwed the new rails into place with 6x100mm screws. No, these aren't exterior screws, but I'm pretty sure they'll outlive the fence.
Probably a fair point. They're outside their use case, but again, he's talking about replacing this fence in a few years. I don't think the screws are going to become a problem in that span of time.
Time to point out an error I'm really cross about. It was 4:15 p.m. and with time marching, I was so involved in the job I didn't think to check whether the fence was level before reattaching the existing fence to the new post. And as you can see, it has sunk into the ground over the years and could have done with being raised 25 to 30 millimeters.
That would have been a great time to make the correction. It's always easier to sit and Monday morning quarterback this thing, so to speak. Hindsight is 20/20.
Pretty much all that remained was to fix back into position the feather edge boards I'd salvaged from the collapsed fence using 40 by 2.65mm galvanized nails.
I do like how these feather edge boards overlap. A new board is prone to want to shrink. So as it loses moisture content and it dries, it's going to shrink up. Think a sponge. A dried sponge is smaller than a fully wet sponge. By overlapping the feather edge boards, you still keep a very private fence, even if the boards were to shrink. I really like this style. Now, he didn't trim his post, though, so he could be coming back later to do that, but it's definitely easier to trim the post without the pickets on. Just one less obstacle in the way when you're cutting them.
I had leftover from the garage re-roof. If it had been a wider section of fence, I'd have used a jig to prevent me having to periodically check the feather edge boards were level, as I did for that Everest rail fence I showed you earlier. But the whole process of refixing the boards probably only took about 3/4 of an hour, so I didn't bother. Now, the end result of not straightening those rails or string lining the top of the fence before attaching the feather boards, and instead allowing the feather edge boarding to
hindsight being 2020 again. So the existing panel raise it up to be more in line with where you're headed with the fence, but also using a jig from one to the next, or one post to the next, would have illustrated the need to lower those boards or to trim the boards to where they would become lower.
One final job was to treat those two new posts, as they've been in the garage for decades and I don't know how well tunnelized they are, if at all. So yeah, that's the primer, courtesy of Wood Finishes Direct. They haven't paid me for that reference. About time people start paying me for this stuff.
So it looks like their stain and sealant is a two-part process. So rather than like the expert professional wood care products that we like to use that are just a one step, you mix and apply. It looks like this might have some mixing involved. So if the fence is a temporary fix, though, I'm not sure that the extra, even if that, if it's only a number of years, even if the post had been left untreated, I don't know that it would have become an issue, especially as the pickets and rails that were installed on it aren't treated, aren't being stained, it looks like. I don't know. Let me know what you think.
One point to mention. I told you these two posts were old bits of wood I had lying around in the garage. The bigger one here is this one, which is incredibly sturdy. I noticed from the moment I put it in how this wasn't moving. And that's a 4.5 inch or 115 millimeter post. When compared with this more typical post here, I say more typical because you're more likely to get a post like this from a fencing company, and that is 4 inch or 100 mil in depth.
We would call it a 4x4, true. So typically what you'd find here at lumber store, like the big box stores, would be a 4x4 nominal. So those would actually end up measuring about 3.5 by 3.5, or a full inch shorter on either side than the larger post he had showed.
What was striking about the difference was just how much more sturdy this thicker post was than this narrow one, although obviously this narrow one, now it's fixed into the corner, is absolutely rock solid. Just something to be aware of if you're planning to build a pergola or other structure. If, where at all possible, go with something slightly wider.
Yeah, the bigger the post, the better. The more mass there is there to resist warping and twisting. The bigger the post, the better. Absolutely agree.
And the total costing's 77 quid, slightly ruined by having to buy those 3 new rails. So that's it for today. All systems go.
All right, guys, if you like the video, let me know in the comments below. If you've also if you'd like to watch the video in its entirety without my commentary, we'll include a link to the actual full-length video from the channel in the description below. Until next time, I'm Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll see you next time.